Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it, so listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Emily almost didn't have children due to her fear of pregnancy and birth. She shares with us the internal changes she makes as she learns more about birth. She ultimately experiences two straightforward births, one in the birth centre and one born at home. Emily is very practical and shares in great detail the power of the tools she uses to find comfort. She believes her greatest tool in the toolkit was the support of her partner Jeremy. Some great birth wisdom in this episode, so enjoy.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Hello everyone, another episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast, and with me today is the lovely Emily. Hi Emily, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Emily's 1 month postpartum, so she's very fresh and raw, straight off the birth room, straight out of the birth room. She's got little Hugo, who's 17 months, and then Lavinia, who's 1 month old. And so she's had her babies very close together. And I love to bring to my audience two births because each one kind of sets us up. Like, you don't realise the influence that the first birth can have on the second. So before we go there, though, just tell me, Emily, can you go back to when you were pregnant with Hugo, your first son, and how were you feeling about your pregnancy and what sort of preparation did you do to get ready for him?
Yeah, so I had not been looking forward to getting pregnant, and to the point where I almost didn't want to have kids, and that was a factor. I just was really afraid of being pregnant and giving birth. So but Jeremy and I, my partner, decided that we wanted to have 2 kids. So to prepare for that, I had to do some research and first get comfortable with the idea of being pregnant. So read a lot of books and things and got comfortable with that, and then got pregnant and started doing more research along the way.
Can I just ask, what was there concern about in your pregnancy being pregnant and giving birth, or just giving birth?
So once I got pregnant, I was fine with that. But before I
Right.
got pregnant, I was worried about being pregnant just because it looks really uncomfortable, from what I could tell. But actually, it was not as bad as I had imagined.
Right.
So
Do you
once
know
I
where
was
that
pregnant, I
fear
was more.
came from?
I have no idea. And
Yeah.
when I spoke to my mum about it, she was very about, giving birth. She was really matter of fact about it, and she was like, it's just something you do. It's fine. Like, what are you worried about? So I don't really know where I got that from, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's
Well,
just from what's around us, and you
yeah.
don't really sometimes don't hear positive stories,
Yeah.
which is why I'm here today to share
Yeah.
mine. But yeah, so um, then I went to prenatal yoga and that was really helpful in like learning some techniques for labor. And then your course as well, Tracy, obviously was really helpful and put both me and Jeremy into a much more confident space in preparing for the birth. So thinking about different strategies that we could use to make it go smoothly. And we had decided to go through the birth centre, so they don't generally offer medical pain relief, like an
Yeah.
epidural, that kind of thing. And I, not having done it before, I wasn't sure whether I'd really want an epidural, so it was kind of a hard choice to make, not
Yeah.
having been through it. But by the end of the pregnancy, with all of that preparation, I'd become much more confident that I didn't want that kind of pain relief. I just don't feel very comfortable with medical procedures if I can help them.
Right. Yeah.
So uh, I was just in the mindset of feeling pretty ready to give it a go, but also being open to anything that
Yeah.
needed to happen on the day.
So let me come in there.
Yeah.
The birth centre model, which we've talked a lot about models of care in one of our episodes. For those who are interested, look up Ali Tate. She talks a lot about it. But the birth centre model is based on continuity of care of a known midwife, which is a real sort of, like, a lot of women like that. But it's also based on the principles of normal birth, trusting that women can actually give birth. And whilst they don't promote pain relief, it's still accessible. Like, you can still transfer to the birth suite and get an epidural or whatever it is that you need. So it's still an option, but it
Yeah.
is based on a whole different belief system that, yeah, women have been birthing forever and women can do this. And so it's interesting, you had to sort of come in and go, okay, well, they're not going to be promoting pain relief. So I've got to get my head around it. So as you did that preparation, can you identify, and it was a while ago now, so it may not come to you, but can you identify what were the key little shifts in your mind that took you from the fear that you're experiencing, even being pregnant, let alone giving birth, to then sort of getting quite confident towards the end? What were some of those turning points?
I think a key was firstly just understanding what is happening during birth
Mm,
and
right.
what the pain that some people feel, or that a lot of people probably, the discomfort, what it actually is,
Mm,
and knowing that it's something that your body's trying to, it's pain with a purpose if it's painful. So I think that's just knowing what the process was really helped me. And then also, what are the key risks or things that might not go as planned, and what happens if they occur. So there's always sort of a pathway if things occur, and feeling confident that I knew
mm,
what a planning in advance, what kind of decisions I'd make if certain factors came up. And then I guess just feeling like I had a lot of tools up my sleeve to manage things. So just that feeling of preparedness, that there were plenty of options like moving around and having doing visualizations or uh, lots of vocalizations or things like that were
mm,
all options to me depending on how I felt at the time. So just yeah, being prepared made
mm.
me feel prepared.
Yeah, gosh, that's such a powerful statement. Even just understanding the process, which we think we do, but I certainly know, even when I've taught midwives, and the way that we frame the understanding of the physiology is often very different than just textbook physiology. It's really helping people to understand essentially the difference between the stress response and the relaxation response. And the relaxation response is bringing your body into the best physiological version of yourself that you can be. In other words, then you can activate and make use of those powerful performance enhancing hormones. So that understanding, and then the tools in the toolkit, understanding the landscape of birth, when you need help, how to manage that. So what Emily said there is really, I think, the key to preparation, and harnessing the mind using visualizations and focusing your mind on things that you want rather than what you don't want. Super, super powerful. So you started to feel a bit confident, and your partner got on the same page as you. Jeremy was pretty happy with that process.
Yeah, he was. Initially, I think he was a bit more of the mind of maybe we'll just go in and follow whatever is medically advised to us, and that's how it sort of works. And I guess I sort of thought that as well. And it was through the pregnancy that I learned that there are a lot of grey areas, and you can ask questions, and you can sort of be a bit more involved in the decision making if decisions need to be made. So, and he, especially after your course as well, came around, like sort of came more on board with that approach as well. And we certainly weren't going to ignore any medical advice or anything like that, but we just
Mm,
knew that we could be really active in the process and not just need to kind of blindly follow or accept what was happening, and we could be in some level of control of what was going on.
mm,
Um, yeah, so
mm.
he was a little bit, I think he was probably a little bit nervous beforehand, but then after the learning the strategies that he could use to help me, he felt like he had a role, and well, he did have a role. He had a huge role in both the
Yeah.
births. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, good on him. Yeah, and that questioning of recognizing that your caregivers have to manage birth, that's their job. They're managing the paradigms of safety, but there is a lot of grey area in there. And just because something is offered doesn't mean that's the best policy for, or that's the best approach for an individual pregnancy. We want to take the risk analysis that often your carers will offer and then team it with what's going on with this pregnancy helps you to make better decisions, and that's really what we go for. And then people are much happier with what unfolds, even if you need help, even if you go down having any other type of birth, cesareans, a bit of assistance vaginally. You can accept that outcome a lot better when you've been a part of the decision making. So that advocacy role that Jeremy hooked onto was really good. Terrific. All right. So tell us, Em, about when Hugo started to arrive. How did it unfold for you?
Yeah, so Hugo was 9 days late. So by the time he was coming, I was well and truly ready. I was sick of waiting. We had booked in for an induction at the end of the week, so at 42 weeks. And I was really keen not to do the induction. So at 41 weeks, we suddenly kicked into gear and started trying to get the baby to arrive naturally before the deadline of the end of the week.
Yep.
So did all these crazy things to promote the baby to arrive, and he did. So there were a few nights in a row where I had a few contractions, and I thought maybe this was it, but then woke up the next morning and nothing had happened. And then one day we went for a walk, and I had a nap in the afternoon until 7 p.m., luckily. And then that night I started having some more contractions, and around 1 a.m. I was kind of became pretty sure that this was it. So I was actually hanging in the bathroom because I didn't want my waters to break and mess up the house, which was really silly. So I was on the bathroom in the bathroom on a pile of towels, but then at about 4 a.m. I was like, this is probably enough. Need to get Jeremy. I was trying to let Jeremy rest, but I decided it was time for him to help me rest at 4 a.m. So went and woke him up, and um, but I didn't get much rest after that. It was pretty intense. I was having a lot of back pain, and so I was getting Jeremy was getting heat packs and warming them up in between contractions, and I was kind of in between every contraction. We were sort of getting ready for the next one, and he would go and heat more heat packs up, and that was how we spent a lot of the morning. And um, it was pretty, I'd say it was like slightly chaotic in that every time between each contraction, I was like, get that next heat pack ready. And so he was being put to work, but we were getting through it, and we'd sort of put all the clocks away, and was just, knew it could be a long process. So I was just hanging out there doing that for a long time. And then we decided to turn the shower on. So I hopped in the shower, and I was finding that really helpful, the hot water on my back. And Jeremy, I guess, got a break from all that heating of heat packs while I was in the shower. So he was just sitting there with me, and he was trying to time contractions on his phone. And we kind of got to a point where I sort of started saying, I think maybe we should call the midwife. And he was saying, well, you haven't actually reached the level of contractions that she suggested. Like she said, call her when we got to something like 3 minutes apart, and each contraction 1 minute long. But I sort of was like, oh, I just really think I just want to get someone else's sort of input here now. So that was at about 3 p.m. So we'd spent all morning kind of just hanging out, doing it ourselves. And then we called the midwife, and that's when we found out that our midwife wasn't available. She'd done another birth that day. and also so the continuity midwives work in pairs, and the partner was also unavailable. So the two
Oh,
midwives that we
wow.
dealt with the whole time weren't available, and there was a slight moment of confusion where I kind of wondered if any midwife was going to come. But she was. So we got a new midwife that we hadn't met, and she was wonderful. And
Oh,
she turned up to check how things were going. So she turned up while I was in the shower, and I've never met someone while I was standing in the shower before, but I was really pleased to see her. And she said, would you like me to check how far along you are? And I kind of was wary of, interrupting things, but also just really wanted to know where we were up to. So I thought, well, I'll celebrate no matter, as long as, even if there's only a minuscule amount of progress here, I'll celebrate that. And I'd had a stretch and sweep a couple of days before as well, so I felt like okay with the procedure of being checked. So she checked, and uh, I was 4 centimeters dilated at that point. So that was really exciting to me. I thought that was pretty good progress.
yeah.
And then she said, "All right, so just carry on here at home." And I was like, "Oh, really?" So we did a little bit more at home, and then about half an hour later, I said to Jeremy, "Can you check if we can go to the hospital because I'd like to use the bath
Mm.
because we don't have a bath at home." And so he called again, and the midwife said, "Yep, that's appropriate. Why don't you meet me at 5 o'clock?" And so we geared up and got to the hospital at 5 p.m. And as soon as I walked in, when she did the vaginal exam, she told me that the baby was posterior, which I didn't know
Wow.
because hadn't been posterior the whole pregnancy, and that was explaining the back pain that I was getting.
Right.
So when we arrived at the hospital, she offered me sterile water injections, and I've I'd heard about those, and they're designed to try and lessen the pain, the back pain that you might get if the baby's posterior. The baby's spine might be rubbing a bit against your spine.
Mm.
Um, so I thought, yeah, let's give them a go, even though uh, I knew that they could be quite painful, and because they sting. And
Yeah.
so we did those, and they really stung. And I was sort of so I'd hopped in the bath. I was looking into Jeremy's eyes. He was looking into my eyes, and they popped those needles in, and I just screamed. I even said beforehand, "I'm going to scream," and I just screamed, and his eyes were watering as well. Both our eyes were watering, and he said that was the most intense part of the entire labor for him. And I'm not really sure if what it did, if anything. It's really hard to tell what it would have been like without them. Um,
Wow.
but yeah,
Let
that
me
was
just come in
kind of
there and just explain a little bit
yeah.
about sterile water injection. So the idea there is by injecting, they do 2 needles, and it takes 2 midwives to do it on each side at the same time. They put it into the layer of the skin. And the idea is the sterile water interferes with the pain pathways. Now, when you've got a posterior labour, which is the baby's rotated, it's sort of facing outwards towards your belly, um, it can be rubbing on the spine, which makes the sensations a lot more intense and localized around the spinal area. It also can mean that the baby's head isn't presenting as favorably on the cervix, which means that you can be having a lot of contractions. But when the baby's sort of at the front, its little crown can act more like a wedge opening the door, whereas when they're rotated, it's sort of more flat, and so it can take longer to open that door. But the sterile water injections are not a bad option in the sense that there's no residual effects on you or baby, which is good, like that, say, the medications have. They can, as Emily's describing, they sting like anything for a very short period of time, but then can give you a bit of relief. But it can be a bit hit and miss too, can't it? Like in terms of how much relief that you get is very individual, but it's certainly something worth trying, particularly if you're getting a backachy labour, because there is no residual effects on you or Bubby. So you're not sure whether it was effective or not?
Yeah, mostly because don't know I don't know, maybe the pain would have ramped up even more without it. It's hard to tell,
Yeah.
but I don't regret doing it, but it was one way to pass the time, that's for sure. Um, but yeah, and it was only I was aware it was going to sting, and it was only a very short time. It was definitely a distraction at the very least, but that felt like a bit of a detour that we did to try
Yep.
and sort that back pain out. And maybe it was effective, but I was heading into the later stages of labor, so they were always going to be a bit more intense
Yep.
anyway. But yeah, and so I found the bath wasn't really doing it for me, which I was surprised about because I'd really been
Mm.
planning to be in the bath, and I hadn't been planning a water birth, but I thought if it did happen in the bath, then that would be nice. But in the end, I found that the shower was really helpful to me.
Oh,
So
okay.
I got in and out of the bath a couple of times, and moving around the room also helped sort of pass the time in, try the bath, try the shower. Um, it just sort of, yeah, passed the time a bit. And and I was sort of yelling through a lot of the contractions and trying to keep those yells really deep and not high pitched, so that I feel a lot more powerful rather than
Yeah.
starting to feel scared or panicked. And that was really helpful in doing that. And
Yeah.
then
So
at a
those
certain
noises
mm,
can help women with the intensity. And
yeah.
it can be, a little bit off-putting for people around her, like
Mhm.
partners who are not used to hearing these noises, particularly out of the person they love, and think, oh, that must be awful. But actually, the vocalizing can be a real release and a real relief. What were you aware of when you were vocalizing?
I think I was still like pretty aware that Jeremy was was there, but and I guess I was just the act of sort of making noises was a little bit distracting from the sensation, but I think it was sort of just thinking about how I'm going to get through this. It's every contraction is only temporary, so
Yeah.
it was about knocking over each one, and after each one going, all right, that's another one down. Like hopefully that one has opened up my cervix a bit more, um, and just sort of trying to. I think with Hugo's birth, I spent a lot of time feeling like I was getting ready for the next one,
Right.
but um, yeah, that's how it was. And then there was a certain point in the shower where just noticed on the wall a little sign that said "soften open," and I thought, oh, that's right. I'm here to open my cervix up to let the baby out. So I'll just start trying to focus on opening. Um, and that's what I did. And I just stood in the shower looking at the drain and I stopped making any noises. And I just started thinking about opening and got into this real sort of state of focus. And Jeremy was quite surprised when I told him I just had a contraction because I was behaving very differently to the previous
Interesting.
contractions. And I don't really know how long I managed to kind of maintain that, but I felt really good in that state for it felt like quite a while. And then things ramped up again, and I had some very confusing and very intense contractions, and later found out that that was the transition to pushing. And sort of, yeah,
So
we went,
sorry to come in there,
yeah,
that
yeah.
little zone of harnessing your mind shifted the way you were able to labor. And
Mm,
that internalizing and surrendering within the mother, you were quieter, you were more internally focused, you were using the power of the mind. Are you suggesting that in that period, the contractions became more manageable, or what shifted?
I think it just seeing that sign on the wall that said "soften open,"
Mm.
just reminded it just sort of reminded me um, of the all the stuff that I'd learned about how relaxing and staying calm can really help direct your body's resources into opening up your cervix. And so I don't really know what happened, but I just started a different way of trying to manage it, and I felt like that really helped. And I think it felt it's hard to know again, like what influenced what, but it did feel
Yeah.
like at that time that really helped things progress along. So I don't think it was necessarily that the contractions themselves changed. It was just more how I was dealing with them.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
Mm.
So then you hit transition.
Yeah, and that was a quite that did feel quite overwhelming, and that was probably the time that I did end up feeling a little bit panicky and feeling a bit like how am I going to deal with this? But in the end, it just goes on really no matter what you do. So
You
we
can't get off the bus.
that's right. You're on the bus, and then I had started to feel like I needed to push. Actually, felt like I needed to push at a certain point, and I got another check, and I was only 7 centimeters, so I had to go. I had to carry on. And then yeah, but this time I got another check, and I was at 10 centimeters, so I was ready to go. And we started moving around the room, trying out different positions for pushing. The midwife was suggesting going into like the traditional position on the bed, like in a semi-reclined position. But I'd heard that I wanted to be upright, so I tried different upright positions. But then she said, "No, I really think you should try the traditional position." And I gave it a go, and it actually really worked.
Ah,
So that was
interesting.
interesting, and that was feeling good. I was able to really do some good pushes, but it did took more than an hour of pushing, and I was getting pretty tired. But I'd say that the pushing did feel better than the contractions before transition, because it felt like I could was actively um, working with those contractions, and I could push, and then pushing made them feel better. Um, so yeah, and then finally we got really close, and then the baby popped out, and I think I was really stunned. I was just like, "Oh goodness, um, there's a baby here," and she said, "Someone's got to take this baby." She's passing me the baby, and there he was. Like it was finally
Wow.
all had happened, and that was at around almost 10 p.m. So been a big day. Suddenly realized I hadn't eaten anything all day, or just had only eaten a little bit of soup at one
Yeah.
point, and how exhausted we both were. But yeah, it was obviously really exciting, and felt like we'd done it. We'd birthed the baby.
Wow. That's, yeah. And had he turned? Had he come into a
He did turn
position?
around. Yeah, in the end, he came
Yeah.
out not posterior. Yeah,
Right. So he turned at some point. And
yeah.
I'm really, it's interesting. Do you have any idea why the midwife had a feeling that that might be a good position for you, which is
No.
sort of semi-reclined?
I never asked her. So
Mm,
yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not sure.
yeah.
I was surprised that she was suggesting that. And yeah, it turned out to be really good. So
Yeah, because you could be more comfortable.
mm,
This is when it comes to second stage, finding the right position is the real key for you to be able to relax and focus. And physiologically, probably the two best positions are on all fours or kneeling because you're leaning forward and you're really opening up the pelvic outlet in that space and your bum's free to respond. But at the end of the day, it's where the mother feels the most comfortable. I had my second baby in that position as well, although I was in the water. So it's you just never know until the day. But sometimes when midwives say, lie on your left side or let's try this, they might be onto something, and it's always worth trying because they can read certain signs in how you're responding to those sensations to push and can be really helpful to do that. So that's interesting. So you had little Hugo, and then not long after, there was a very short gap between your two babies. You were pregnant with little Lavinia. How were you feeling in her pregnancy?
yeah. So right after Hugo was born, actually we had a lot of issues with breastfeeding, and I was really determined to breastfeed, and
Yeah.
so we it was just a really tough sort of period, and I was saying to Jeremy, I was actually really upset because I was like, I just can't do this again, and I wanted two kids, but I just don't think I can have another one because this is just so hard. And he
Yeah.
said, "Don't." I said, "Just promise me you'll never let me have another child." And he said, "Why don't we just put this on hold?" He very wisely didn't promise anything, and
Yeah.
yeah, time went on, and I was like, "No, I'd like to get this other baby born that we're wanting, so that I can then." eventually, get my body back a bit quicker and sort of do the recovery and have two kids that are similar age and
Yeah.
they can grow up together and we can look after them both at similar stages of their lives together. So um, when Hugo's about 7 months old, we were kind of like, oh, we're, getting in the groove. Like, why don't we give it a go? And next minute, we've got another one on the way. And I was feeling a lot more confident because I'd already done it before, and I'd heard that a second birth could be easier because your body's also already done it before. So I was feeling pretty good about it, and also the pregnancy just flew by because I was so busy with
Mm.
Hugo. Jeremy and I were both busy working and looking after Hugo, and with Hugo's pregnancy, I was checking in every week on how big he was, what kind of fruit he might be the size of, all of this stuff. And with Lavinia, I had no idea what she was up to in there. She was just in there. And yeah, so um, it was, I also kind of had felt like I'd learnt a few things from Hugo's birth. So when it was coming up to the crunch time, I was trying to carve out some time to sort of revise on the techniques that I had up my sleeve for Hugo and also just get in the mindset and feel I didn't quite feel ready. I felt like I was so busy that I hadn't had time to kind of get in
Mm.
a zone and prepare things and maybe even prepare the house a bit for her arrival and have systems in place for when she got here and just have her stuff organized and that kind of thing. Um, but one thing I did do was, since I knew that the bath hadn't been what I was hoping for with Hugo and the shower was really where it was at, I decided to try out a TENS machine instead of the bath. And so you can't use a TENS machine in water, but I thought that might be better than the heat packs the chaotic heat pack scenario where we're trying to heat the heat packs in time for each contraction.
Right.
So I ordered one of those to try, and I felt really good about having that up, like a new tool up my sleeve this time. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's how I was feeling.
And what decision did you make about your model of care? You were still in the birth center.
Yeah,
But
so I actually asked for the same midwife that had birthed Hugo, helped us birth him because I really liked her, felt like she really helped us with his birth
yeah.
um, and we were still going through the birth center, same as last time. And then on one of our first appointments, she said, now you know you'd be a really good candidate for a home birth because your first birth went really smoothly and you don't live too far from the hospital and all of this. And I said, oh no, I think that'd be quite messy and I'm not sure if we have enough hot water in our shower to get us through that.
Well, you were worried about your waters breaking at home with your first one, weren't you?
That's right,
It would
yeah.
mess up your home.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, which by the way, they broke right at the end in the shower in the hospital, so it was not a worry at all.
Oh, wasn't that
Um,
good? You're such a clean birther, Em.
yeah. So we just carried on, and then after, well, actually, so then the midwife's like partner midwife had a check in with me also, and she also said, have you talked about having a home birth? And again, I was like, oh, not sure about that. But then we decided to go to an information session because we were thinking, oh, it'd be pretty good not to have to drive to the hospital. The
Mhm.
car trip was a bit,
Yeah.
it's hard having contractions in the car, and also, especially for the second one, knowing it might be a bit quicker and it might be, I didn't feel confident knowing when to go to the hospital. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't sure how I'd make that decision, and it might be easier just to not have to worry about that at all and not try to think about when
Mm.
to go. So at 34 weeks, we finally made the decision and we asked to join the home birth stream. And we were really lucky because we were just lucky that the midwife that we had happened to be a home birth qualified midwife. So we didn't we almost fell into this decision. We didn't actively
Mm.
go out seeking a home birth, but we we didn't actually really have to do anything differently. She organized it all for us.
Yeah.
It was still through the birth center, but and so instead of calling and saying, is it time for us to go to the hospital? We just had to call the midwife and she would come to us. And and she'd call in a second midwife as well, so we'd have two midwives, and we had to pick up a pack from the hospital at 36 weeks of medical equipment. So we had all the equipment that they
Mm.
would use in the birth center in our house in case of anything was needed, and we had oxygen delivered as well in case that was needed. And if we had have been in the birth center and we had to transfer to the birth suite if anything had happened, I felt like it would be similar to
Yeah.
transferring from home because we're in proximity to the hospital and everything that was in the basically like whatever we could have done in the birth center could be done in our house. And I was feeling confident that we hadn't actually needed any of that equipment except for
Yeah.
the sterile um, water, which incidentally is included in the home birth kit. And we were debating, Jeremy and I were debating whether we'd do it again or not if needed. But we luckily never
Did,
had to come to that because
did Jeremy
Lavinia,
have an opinion about that as he looked into your eyes when you were
he,
having it? Was he a
he,
bit
he was,
overwhelmed by them?
yes, he was surprised that I would consider doing it again. But he said it's, obviously my choice, but he
Yeah.
would be really shocked if we needed to do that again. But
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So that was pretty exciting, and I was kind of feeling pretty excited about it. But I think we weren't really sure what people's reactions would be as well. So
did you
uh,
tell people?
initially, I didn't want to tell anyone.
Mm.
But then I thought, oh, that actually makes it seem like it is sort of frightening or it's
Yeah.
something to hide. So then I decided I sort of just started telling people if it came up. And we were especially a little unsure about telling our parents in case we didn't want to concern them if they were concerned about a home birth.
Yeah.
And I think we ended up telling them both because we didn't want it to come up as a surprise somehow, like maybe during labor or if we
Mm.
needed, that we might have needed them to help pick up our dog and Hugo. So we decided to let them know, and I think they were both a little surprised, or it wasn't something that they were familiar with. But to their credit, they also both sort of were like, "Oh, really?" And then they just listened to us explain how why we felt comfortable with it, and didn't really say much more. And it was only afterwards that um, that they kind of said, "Oh, we're really relieved that it went well. We were a bit worried about it." So they didn't let that they didn't come in and try and tell us to change our mind or tell us that they were concerned. And I think it's um, just not what people are used to. It's most births
Yeah.
happen in the hospital.
And
Yeah,
most people have a lot of fear around the idea of childbirth, like, oh, but what if you need help? Well, if you need help, you get help. Like
yeah,
it's pretty simple, but yeah, it can be fear producing. And when I have home birth um, couples in my classes, I often ask this question, and I don't encourage them to share with every Tom, Dick, and Harry, like, anybody who's interested, because it just invites opinions, and other people's opinions are based on their own model of the world. And at the end of the day, we've got to follow what we feel drawn to and what's right for us. So, yeah, full credit to your parents for not putting that on their fear on you, because if it's not familiar, people wonder, well, why would you do that? But the home birth is the only place where birth is truly undisturbed. And I mean, even you can, like, influences can happen at home too that can disturb birth, but just the process of going to the hospital and getting checked and when do I call the midwife, and all of these things get taken away, and it's a wonderful option to explore if you feel drawn to it. So how did it unfold then?
yeah. So I should add, actually, my dad was quite enthusiastic about it. He was like, "Oh, that'll be wonderful," which is
Oh,
nice.
isn't that good?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Do you
yeah,
know what
so
my I had a home birth. My boys were born at home, and my mother-in-law said to me when I first told her, she said, "Darling, if cows can do it, you can do it." That was
that's
a
very
big
flattering.
quote. Yeah, because she grew up on a dairy farm, and she was used to seeing birth as just an everyday thing. She didn't have much fuss around it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think while I would say Hugo's was overall a positive experience, there were definitely with Hugo moments of sort of stress or panic at certain points. But with Lavinia's, I think I felt so um, in control the whole time, or I felt not in control, but that I understood what was happening and that I felt confident that things were working out and that everything would be fine. So sh my waters actually broke when I was at home. So it was quite unexpected because I was 37 days and sorry, 37 weeks and 5 days
Oh, she was
pregnant.
earlier.
And because Hugo had come 9 days late, I was expecting to maybe at least make
Mm.
it to around 39 weeks. But so I was not ready, and I had been trying to get some time to sort of mentally prepare, but it was difficult with Hugo, like with having to look after him. So yeah, I felt this trickle down my leg, and I thought, no, that can't be right. But I became more and more confident that it was my waters, and I told Jeremy, and Jeremy had just spent a long day gardening and was hoping for a good rest. So he was like, "Oh no, time to get into action." But no contractions had happened, so I called the midwife, and I got a different midwife answering the phone, and she said, you know, just see how what happens overnight, and then we can you can come in tomorrow morning and check what's going on. And I said, is there anything that we'd do differently overnight? And she said no. So I was like, okay. So went to bed, and I was sort of hoping that I'd start feeling contractions because I didn't want to end up having to get induced if labor didn't actually start and my waters had broken. So I was a little bit kind of taken aback that things were starting when I felt a little bit unprepared. But then I thought, well, at least I'm getting this warning now, so I can go to bed and sort of
Mm.
ready myself for it if it happens. And it's not just that contractions have just started all of a sudden. I've got this kind of this warning, however long this warning will be. And yeah, went to off to sleep. And I think Jeremy said, I sort of said, we weren't really sure what was happening. So he got in touch with his mum, and I said, oh, I don't know if I'm having a contraction, and then just dropped off to sleep. And so he was like, oh, so he had to go to sleep, not really knowing like what was going on. But then I sort of woke up a few times during the night with some more contractions, and I was feeling really happy to have, much like with Hugo, where I was like, oh, thank goodness, labor's happening. I won't have to have an induction. The same thing happened. I'm like, oh, great, I'm having contractions. I'll be able to get away without needing to have an induction. And um, kind of in the, I think around 4 a.m. again, I woke Jeremy up and said, I'd like you to help me put the TENS machine on. And he said, oh, so you think it's really happening? I'm like, yeah, I think it is. So we put the TENS machine on, and the TENS machine was an absolute game changer. I would just highly recommend, if you're thinking about it, to give it a go, because it just helped so much. Made the every time that I had a contraction, I was able to press the little boost button, and that made put like a sensation into my back that I could focus on instead of the contraction. And so Jeremy's mum came over to take Hugo to daycare because it was his daycare day. So she was just eating breakfast with him, and I actually felt like I could come out and say hello to her between the contractions. They were fairly far apart. So Jeremy was surprised to see me in the kitchen. He thought I'd be hiding away at the back, but then I did get kind of a quite a big contraction, and she was mid-sentence, and I just walked out of the room. And she was like, I think she took that as her cue to leave. So she got out of there really quickly with Hugo. And it was just Jeremy and I, and we were just sitting in the living room, and I was sitting on an exercise ball. And every time I had a contraction, I'd just press the boost button and get up and walk, because I felt like walking was able to help me keep my body all loose. Whereas when I was sitting down, I was tensing up,
Mm.
and I couldn't help tensing up. So I was walking around during contractions, and sort of yelling through some of them, and with those deep yells. And in between them, we were just sitting, chatting in the living room, which was nice. And I think we kind of, with the home birth as well, we kind of felt like we would have spent a lot of the labor at home anyway, because you're aiming to only go to the hospital at the end. So we
Yeah.
might have done that regardless of whether we were planning to go to the hospital or not. And then I felt like the contractions were quite far apart, but quite getting quite strong. So in the middle of one of them, I just suddenly went, "Oh, I need you to call the midwife." And Jeremy said, "Can you wait until this contraction's finished?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So he was like, "Why don't you just wait for a second so we can talk about it?" And then he's like, "Okay, so you sure you want me to call her? What do you want me to say?" And I said, "I just want you to call her and see if she can come and help me know how far along I am." And he called her, and that's when we sort of found out that she wasn't available. Um,
Oh, wow.
so we actually ended up having one of the two midwives that we should have had for Hugo's birth
Okay.
coming to the house, and she said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." So she turned up and she just took one look at me and she was like, "Okay, I think things can progress quite quickly from here." And this was kind of it was at like 9:30 in the morning, so or maybe a bit later, but it not much. Oh no, it was probably more like. Well, I'm getting a bit confused on the timings, but it was still fairly like not too many hours had passed, and she we had a check, and I was 5 centimeters dilated, and she kicked into year, and she was quite like in a flurry of getting all the stuff out of the kit, preparing the oxygen so that it'd be absolutely ready if needed.
Mm,
Calling, she called the paramedics just to let them know that there's a home birth happening, so that if they're needed to be called, that they're already aware of the address and everything, so they're just on standby. And she called the second midwife in straight away. And in the meantime, I took the TENS machine off and hopped in the shower on all fours and just had the water going. And I don't think I was really aware that she felt that things could happen so fast, but Jeremy certainly had noticed that she was thinking things might happen quite quickly. Um, and I was really thrilled to be 5 centimeters, and I was like, "This is great." And I think I was surprised that she wasn't more enthusiastic, but I think she was actually just she did think things were progressing fast, and therefore she was having to get organized. Um, so yeah, then in the shower,
mm.
I
I'll
was
just come in
oh
there.
yeah.
Five centimeters. Sometimes people think labour starts at 0 and goes to 10, and 5 centimeters is halfway. And whatever it's taken you to do the first 5 centimeters, it's going to take you to the same to do the rest. That's not how it works. Typically, particularly when women are relaxed, and if babies are in good positions, it can take you a lot of hours to even thin out the cervix, because labour starts before 0 centimeters. And so that thinning out process can take hours. And then, maybe you get checked and they're saying, "Oh, you're not even 1 centimeter." And you think, "What? It's not working." No, no, no. The first job of your labour is to thin out that cervix. Whereas with a second baby, because the body has a memory of doing it, it often takes a lot less contractions to thin out the cervix and then open the door. So by the time you hit 5 centimeters, that's very well progressed. And I've seen women, even first time mothers, go from 5 to 10 in an hour. So
Mm.
that's probably what your midwife was picking up on is, "Oh, okay, game's on. She's well and truly opening that door now." And you can dilate very quickly. It's a little bit, it can be a slow start, but it can speed up towards the end. But of course, that's not always the way it goes. Sometimes, it depends on what the baby's doing, how hard they're pushing, the position of their little head. All of that will influence how women progress. So she was getting ready with all this stuff. You were in the zone in the shower. What happened then?
Yeah, and also with Lavinia and with the time, including the time in the living room and the time in the shower, I think that Jeremy was a lot more relaxed as well. And maybe partially because there were no heat pack duties involved. Um,
He
and
wasn't running as fast.
He wasn't running around. He was actually just sitting there. And I had said to him, like I think last time, like he was very focused on timing contractions and doing all his
Mm.
roles. And he was even doing decorating. He was decorating the room like while I was in labor, and I was saying,
Oh,
the time for that is over. Like it's all over. Like don't worry about that. Like
putting up the fairy lights.
yeah. Um, so
Oh.
this time I said, I just really want you to be just with me and just relax with me and just be there. And even just your presence will like really means a lot to me. So you don't even have to be doing anything. And he did. He kind of wasn't timing contractions or doing anything. We never timed contractions the second time. And he just sort of was there. So yeah, so he was there with me in the shower while I was in the
See,
shower.
that's love. That's love, Em, isn't it? That's the
Yeah,
top thing on their checklist. Women
that's
in
right.
labor need to be loved.
Yeah.
And there's nobody better in that room than the person who loves her, whether it's a partner or a friend or a mother or whoever's with you during birth. It's that feeling of connection. And it creates this intrinsic safety in the mother of feeling protected, safe, loved, and supported. They're the key things. And I just, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now, but a friend of mine sent me a beautiful video of dolphins surrounding a whale who's birthing because there's sharks in the water and the dolphins were
Oh,
there protecting the whale. Like, so, we're no different to other animals, other mammals, that connection that he gave you in that moment, which is what you asked him for. Do you feel like that really helped you progress in that space?
yeah, I think so. I just think it helped me feel much more relaxed and everything
Mm,
felt really normal and it felt really nice to just be the two of us.
beautiful.
Yeah, so it was really good and yeah, so while I was in the shower, the two midwives were sort of mostly in the bedroom. So they just kind of left us to be there, the two of us for a lot of the time. And I thought, okay, here I am. Like, this is the time where I have to get in that zone that I got into with Hugo in the shower, where I was looking at the drain and getting all like soft and open. So that's what I did. I just managed to find that place again and managed to do it a lot faster and a lot, I think, for a bit longer as well. Like I just knew that place that I had to go to, so I was able to get there and do that. And so I'd just be kind of silent during the contractions, and then I'd be talking to the midwives and Jeremy in between them. And then as soon as I'd get a contraction, I'd just like kind of put my hand up or just sort of tell everyone to be quiet while I worked through that. And after each one, sometimes I'd just be like, oh, I smashed that one, or like that, another one down, like yes, did it. And then I had a really funny kind of clunky fit. Like I had a very, very long contraction. It felt like maybe two or three on top of each other, and I felt all this clunky movement inside. And I was just thinking, this one is just like very hard, and I was yelling and but I was thinking this has to be the transition, because if it's not, like what is this, like this just, it must be transition. So although it just felt, I was just like, when's this going to stop, at the same time I was thinking this could be a really good thing because it could be the
Mm.
transition. So I was feeling, it was really, really intense, but I was also feeling comfortable with, like, sorry, I was feeling extremely uncomfortable, but I was feeling comfortable mentally with it, because I knew that it was it was only going to be progressing things along, and it couldn't last forever. So I just had to ride it out, and I did that. And then I just immediately started needing to push. So I felt really happy with how I'd handled it, because I think with Hugo,
Mm.
I'd sort of gotten very panicky at that point, but this time I felt like I knew what was happening.
Flipped it. You
Yeah.
flipped it in your mind. Well
Yeah.
done. Wow.
Yeah. And then they asked me to turn around because I'd been facing outwards, and they wanted me to face the wall so that they could see what was happening with the pushing. And it was really hard to move. And I was like, I'm doing my best. And we finally managed to maneuver myself so I was facing the way that they needed, and just started pushing. Whereas with Hugo, it had taken over an hour. With Lavinia, it was just 14 minutes of pushing. It was just really a few pushes, and I also like I knew when she was coming out. Whereas with Hugo, I sort of was so tired, and I don't think I really even knew when we were getting close to him being born. But with Lavinia, I could tell that she was coming out, and yeah, her little head popped out and she started speaking, and we were waiting for another contraction for her body. So there was just this little head going squeak, 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 and
Really? She was
yeah,
talking on her way out.
that's
Oh,
right.
wow.
Yep. And then there she was, and this time there was none of the shock. It was more just like, oh, there she is, and I was able to pick her up and
Wow.
hold her to me, and yeah, it was helped to the bed, and we got in bed and snuggled up, and that was it. And it was so kind of matter of fact and I think maybe some home births, it's nice for people who are like really spiritual or into that kind of thing, that they want to have a nice home birth. And but to me, it was just very practical, and it just felt so matter of fact, and it was all done. So it was really great.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fabulous stories. Did you have any issues with tearing or anything like that?
So with Hugo, I had that what was described as a small second degree tear, and I was a bit. I'd been really, really worried about tearing actually,
Mm.
but and it did like kind of sting a little bit, but and it made the recovery the next week after the birth. It was a bit sore, but it wasn't nearly as horrific as I had imagined that a tear could be. Like I just think I
Yeah.
probably overblew it beforehand. It was just like any other small injury. Like it was,
Yeah.
not that big of a deal. But then with Lavinia, there was no, I didn't require any stitches or anything. It was,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, just a small first degree tear, which just
Mm.
healed up on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful. There
yeah.
you go. And it's true. It's hard to get your head around the idea of tearing, particularly in that part of the body. For
Yeah.
the most part, like anything in the body, it heals. And with the right support from our caregivers, which we're very fortunate to have, it's not something really to pay too much attention to. So you had these two very straightforward, amazing births, but you brought a lot to the birthing space. You were well prepared, you got your head around the process. You used your toolkit, you used lots of different tools to help you find comfort. You had beautiful Jeremy who was completely on board and really understood what you needed, and the care of an incredible group of midwives where you can never underestimate the power of a good midwife to support women all the way through, because so much of even second stage can be influenced by how that mother's feeling in first stage and what the baby's doing and helping babies to turn and all these little things that sometimes we need help with has really led to you being able to give birth to these two beautiful children. When you look back at that journey now, Emily, what have you learnt about yourself through that process? And just extend it. How do you think that's prepared you for parenting too?
Yeah, I think I've learned that can, I can I could do something that I thought would be a huge challenge. So it gives a sense of accomplishment, and that I can get through things, and also that my body can do amazing things as well. Um, and I think I'd applied a few previous experiences to birth, like things like going for a run where you're pushing through and you're sort of feeling like you want to stop, but you use techniques to keep going when exercising. And I think I'm kind of looking forward to applying that when I can start playing sports and doing exercise again. Like I think I just have a new appreciation for what my body can achieve.
Mm.
And I think in terms of preparing for parenting, I kind of, particularly with Hugo, I kept saying to people, oh, the birth, it was good. It was a bit of a marathon, but it was fine. And that was in the early days. And then I realized that the actual marathon is the parenting. Parenting lasts a lot longer than labor. And you're going on sleep deprivation, weeks of weeks, months of not sleeping like you're used to, and having being on demand at all times for feeding and looking after the baby. And so I think getting off to a good start with the birth set me up for a good start to parenting.
Mhm.
And I think with especially with Lavinia, the way she just turned up in our house, and Hugo just kind of came home from daycare and she was just there, and like just kind of carrying on with our lives straight away afterwards, made it just seem like she just dropped in and now we're just looking after her as well. And it was just really normal. Whereas
Mhm.
I think if Hugo the birth was a little bit more exhausting, so he came home a little bit more exhausted and sort of a little bit more less on the front foot in some ways. But yeah, I think by having those births and feeling good about them afterwards, it meant that we're able to ready to move on and start trying out parenting and feeling good about that too. And in the middle of the night when the baby's not sleeping or you're really exhausted, even during the day, it's just good to know that you can get through anything and everything's also temporary. So that's, I guess, something I've learned through by looking at Hugo at only 17 months old and comparing him to Lavinia, who's only 1 month old, the progress that Hugo's made and how big he's become and all the things he can do really makes me realize how quickly that time has gone with him and to really treasure that time with Lavinia. So even when she's maybe I just wish she would go to sleep or I'm waking up again to feed her and I'm so tired. But I'm thinking, well, this is the price of the privilege of spending this time with this little creature because she won't be like this forever. She's going to grow up so fast. And I'm not sure if I really appreciated that as much with Hugo while I was trying to get through it. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the journey that I've been on with both of them, knowing that everything is so temporary in this whole journey.
And that's a great frame for seeing a labor and a birth. You know, the contractions, they're going to come and they're going to go. And at the end of it, you get the bonus of the baby. And it's a beautiful sort of metaphor of understanding that what we learn in birth can set us up for parenting. And so when women feel safe, loved, and supported, they get the right support, even if they need help, even if their birth needs some extra support and help, or the baby comes out of the sunroof, that whole ability to roll with the unpredictability of birth and where it takes you is part of what is going to stand you in good stead for the next phase, which, by the way, is a marathon. It's a life sentence, a marathon without an end and without a finish line, because these little ones are absolutely in our hearts forevermore. I loved your story, Emily. I loved the detail you went into with the support that the tools gave you to find comfort and how you're able to overcome, your initial resistance to birth. And then to talk about home birth, not in a spiritual way, but a really practical way. And I love that too. I think more people should consider it as an option. It does tend to attract very skilled midwives who are confident at working with people at home. And those skilled midwives can often help us to overcome complexity that happens in a hospital because they have to. They're trying to get the job done in a very low fuss way. So it's certainly an option for those listening in today. Is there anything else you want to finish off with?
I just think we sort of covered it a little bit, but it's to me, the support of Jeremy was so critical, and I think he really got skilled up in how to support me, and he wouldn't have, he would always have been keen to support me, but I think it can be overwhelming for the partners if they're not sure what to do, and I think your partner or your birth support person can be a massive asset to the whole process, and they could probably help or hinder depending on how they behave and how they're feeling. And so I think that can be an overlooked part of preparing for the birth. Actually talking to each other, partner getting prepared and knowing what their role is in supporting you is so critical. And so when I've had friends that are having babies, I suggest to them that they really try and get their partner on board and ready to go as well. So that's just one kind of thing that I think is really important as well.
Mm. I second that in a big way. It's a big focus we have on the Transform Your Birth course, because you're right, partners can make or break a birth. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, and also if anyone sort of had the experience that I had where they had their first baby and then they were like, oh gosh, like I don't think I can do this again for whatever reason, whether it's the birth or the breastfeeding or the just looking after the newborn. Um, Firstly, I got a lot of benefit out of meeting other mums, joining mums groups. I did quite a few mothers groups, including your mother's group,
Yeah, the
Tracy.
Thriving as a New Parent groups.
Thriving as a new parent,
Yeah.
yeah. And that just was a real game changer for me, meeting other parents, because I didn't really have many or any friends that had babies.
Mm.
And then also, people say this, and I found it hard to believe, but my second baby is a lot different to my first baby, and the second birth was different to the first one. And so it's not guaranteed that you're going to go through the exact same experience again, for better and worse, however it was. So if you're trying to make that decision and you're feeling a bit not sure about it, I have to say that our second time around has been an absolute breeze compared to the first one. And that's just, I guess, like maybe a ray of hope if you're not sure about going again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because you're being upgraded, your whole system is being upgraded, and your capacity and capability is being expanded as well. And we forget that. And we do learn when things are hard. So that first one is always the one that breaks us in.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Oh, thank you, Emily. You've given so much beautiful wisdom in this session. And for those listening, this is what we do in this podcast. So please support the podcast. Let other people know about it, because yes, we go into stories, but we also like to bring in that wisdom, the things that move the needle in birth, and then how birth sets us up for parenting. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au? Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.